From Wakefield, this is the Nolan Carr Night Show, inviting you to join Nolan and his guest this week, Bill Schoening, to the show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Nolan.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the show. And after a week off, I'm proud to say I have the guest of all guests, originating from the city of brotherly love as one of its favorite sons. This man has several other monikers as well. Some may call him ingenious, a savant with stylistic sports sayings, Texas's by Sam, a musical maestro, or even to some of a certain generation in location, the voice of death. But to those who've been living in Charles Barkley's favorite city, aka San Antonio, for the past 2 decades plus, may recognize Bill Schoening as the voice of the San Antonio Spurs radio. It's both an honor and privilege to have you join us this week on the program. How are you this evening?
Very good. Thanks for that long introduction. I'm not sure if I can live up to all of that.
Well, hey, clearly, if you're in the correct books with Greg Popovich, the greatest coach of all time, I guess you're doing something correct. I want to start like this, right at the gate. In your profession, you've had exact experience with the last few years of craziness. And as we've been speaking tonight on Monday, May 22nd, 2023, we've been post-pandemic lockdown for a while now. So for you, a veteran, not just of radio, of the sports media world as a bigger conglomerate, what's it like to finally get back into the arena this season, but also travel and that first, experience of that imagination?
Yeah, Nolan, that's a really good question because, this was a tough year as far as wins and losses were concerned for the Spurs, but it was a great season for us because we got a chance. I'm talking about the broadcasters now. A lot of the broadcasters around the league, certainly with the Spurs, we didn't travel during the pandemic. So we were basically looking at road games on television. We were calling the games still. Yeah. We were broadcasting the games, but it was off a monitor. And that presented quite a challenge, especially for this old guy. I had to teach this old dog new tricks, which is not always easy to do. But we were very, very thankful to get back on the road this year and actually see the road games, travel with the team, and also get to know the guys a little bit better because we had not really had good access to the players except through Zoom. And, when you're in a Zoom call with 4 writers and a couple of other broadcasters, you can't really get to know the guys very well. So this year, having a chance to do some live pregame interviews and taped pregame interviews and postgame as well, and traveling with the team and seeing guys around the hotel, it was really cool to just kind of get back into the swing of things and back in the flow, part of the traveling party again. So it was really a fun year, even though we didn't have a lot of wins.
I know through your book and other interviews you've done, you talk about, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing it wrong, by Sam's influence on you as a young kid going to the Phillies games. For most people, maybe that broadcast or do radio, whatever the case may be, they realize at some point that their athletic skills aren't going to take them to the NBA, to the NFL, to MLB. So for you, when was that moment you realized, I'm a good athlete, but I won't get to that level, so let me try to find some other area to get into sports?
Well, I kind of knew very, very early that I wanted to be a broadcaster, regardless of how good I got to be in baseball. And I was a pretty good baseball player through high school, but I never had any dreams of playing Major League Baseball or anything like that. I wasn't that good. I was only about 5'10" and about 175 or 180 pounds. So I didn't have the kind of pop they want most first basemen to have. But I knew from an early age, listening to broadcasting ball games. You mentioned By Sam, who's a native of Texas, who spent his entire career in Philadelphia. And I kind of had the exact opposite thing. My whole career has been in the state of Texas pretty much, except for my first year in Illinois. And then I grew up in Philadelphia. So I'm the complete opposite of the guy that I really try to pattern myself after a little bit. The thing I like most about By Sam, and the reason why he's one of my heroes, is because he was very melodic. I like to write songs and I like music a lot. And it was almost like he was singing his play-by-play. So when I was 10 years old, falling asleep to him, listening to him one night, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. So I never really had that worry about, what else am I going to do? This was what I pretty much made up my mind to do. Now, I had some backup plans within the dream. For instance, if I didn't make it as a sportscaster, I love music so much, I would not as gladly as being a sportscaster, but if I couldn't make it in play-by-play and make it in sports, I had a backup plan. But of course, early in my career, I had to do news as well and commercials and take out the trash on Wednesdays. And, in small market radio, and I worked in small markets for 10 years, you got to do a little bit of everything. And it turned out to be a blessing, Nolan, because you got to do so many different things that you really appreciate the opportunity to do sports. So I had to cover city council meetings, the school board meetings, and all this other stuff just in order to get to do the game on Saturday afternoon.
Well, I'm sure also, and maybe there might not be a huge connection from school board meetings and things of that nature to sports broadcasting, sports radio, but all those experiences you have covering those different areas help you maybe in situations covering sports that maybe you wouldn't even get to experience if that wasn't the case. You went to Temple for a year, then the school, the AAB, you went to afterwards for 6 months where you harnessed your skills and you got a job right after that program. To be at the level that you are, there has to be some level of success that is different from others growing up. Covering games as maybe a high schooler or before college, do you remember the moment you realized I have a knack for this and my ability is pretty good, where it's not, I don't want to say it's super easy, but it's not as difficult maybe for others?
Yeah, my mom really supported me a lot. When I told her at the very young age of 10, I was like a third or fourth grader, that I wanted to do this, and she went out and bought me a Panasonic tape recorder. I know that's foreign to you. That's a long, long time before you. But they actually had these little Panasonic cassettes and with little built-in microphones, and you could even for another dollar, get a little cheap remote microphone. And we would imitate neighbors on the steps, and we would imitate other announcers. So I had friends that would do that kind of stuff with me. And then every once in a while, I would turn down the TV and do my own broadcast of the Saturday game of the week. And I didn't know that I had any kind of a knack for it. I just knew that I loved doing it.
Sure.
And then when I got into high school and started writing a little bit more, and I really learned how to write when I was in high school. I love that part of it too. And the writing skills have really become important for me because I've got to write a lot of intros and outros. I've got to write a lot of reports during the course of the year. And obviously, during the pandemic, I wrote a book over 300 pages. So there was a lot of writing going on there. So, having that ability to write, I think really helped me down the line as well. And being in news, you mentioned covering city council and those types of things. Even though you're writing things about things that you didn't necessarily want to cover or write about, you had to, that was part of your job.
Yeah.
So I think that those skills certainly helped me down the line.
Nowadays, and you obviously see it with social media, and people can go viral quickly in terms of getting their names out there with TikTok and YouTube and all that stuff to get a lot of views. And it's maybe more convenient or a faster track to get somewhere, where maybe when you were growing up, there was no social media. So you have to pay your dues. You have to really have the hunger and take any job you can. Do you see that from your perspective? And do you think that today's generation of sportscasters aren't as hungry perhaps as maybe your generation or people around your time were?
Well, I don't know if it's completely fair to, categorize everybody that they're not as hungry as other guys were. I think everything's different. Obviously the mediums have changed so much. In fact, at a recent NBA meeting, I was not in the radio meeting. I was in the audio meeting. We're no longer radio. Now we're audio dissemination. We're audio content. So things change quite a bit. And of course, a lot of people now that listen to the games don't listen on the radio. They listen to the game on another device, on their computer, on their phone, or whatever. So a lot of different ways to get that message out now. Whereas before, if you were on radio, it was 590 on the dial or whatever the frequency was for the radio station. So in that regard, things have changed. But I think there's still a lot of guys that have passion for what they do. But I think that it's a different industry completely now because of live streaming. My son does a lot of live streaming right now. He loves doing play-by-play, and he's much more technical than I am. He can put a broadcast together in a live stream, and I can't. So I've got a lot of respect for the young broadcasters coming up because, obviously they learned with computers. It's a little different for us older guys. We had to kind of play catch up. But there's a lot of talented young guys out there as well.
Now, I just turned 23 a few weeks ago, and I'm working a part-time job in my hometown. Meanwhile, when you were 23, you were already fast into your career and at several different stops. Besides your brief time in Illinois, and then of course you made your name known in Texas for the different stops, Sam Houston, University of Texas, and so on and so forth. For you, how important was that quick progression for you to get to that big time job, where then other people realize the quality of work you're doing, so you don't have to worry about getting your name out there?
That's another good question, Nolan. I was always anxious to take that next step, but I wasn't always ready for that next step. Sometimes a little bell goes off in your head. You say, okay, I think I've been here long enough. So I was probably at Sam Houston State for about 3 years when I thought, okay, I'm starting to develop skills for play-by-play, and I'd like to try to maybe look around a little bit for a job in a bigger market at a bigger school. Sam Houston State was a great school. In fact, while I was there, they were moving up to Division I, and it was a great experience for me for 6 years. But I'd say the last 3 years I was in Huntsville, I was sending out resumes and tapes and looking for other opportunities. And I got it in 1989 when the University of Texas, actually KLBJ Radio that had the rights to the University of Texas hired me. And therefore, that was my first step into really big time college sports with the University of Texas.
Now, I'm curious from some of your perspective, was there ever a moment, or maybe just in general to anybody who's been doing it for a while, a moment where you thought, oh, I wonder what it would have been like if I stayed there, or having the bug to stay there longer, or was that just a moment where you enjoyed it, but you realized that your time was needed somewhere else?
Yeah, well, I was trying to move up, and I
Yeah,
had a wife and a kid. At the first job, I had one child. As I was going to Austin, we had a 5-year-old. So also looking for better opportunities in terms of being able to make money and support your family. But for me, it was always the goal of getting better and then
sure.
moving up when you're ready to go. And obviously, moving to Austin in 1989, it was a big, big move up from Huntsville, which was really a small college town, to a major college town in the capital of Texas.
Sure.
Now, of course, Austin has just completely blown up. It's doubled in size
Yeah.
since we moved here in 1989. Now it's the 10th most populous city in the country. We still live here in Austin, even though I drive down to San Antonio for the games. But it was a big opportunity for me. But I felt like I was ready, but time will tell. When you get that opportunity, it's a
Sure.
very, very competitive field. And I was very, very fortunate to get the job in Austin. I was told by Tom Dorr, the guy that hired me, that 65 guys applied.
Oh wow.
And I was fortunate enough to get it. Yeah.
There you go. Congratulations on that aspect. You know, Texas, whether Huntsville or Austin, you were working with guys Brad Sham, Jerry Trupiano, Craig Way. But regardless of that, Texas, huge state, you're covering teams that are very successful at the college level, and you're a relatively young guy. For that aspect, you're probably expected to be on top of your game as close to 24/7 as you can be. Experiencing that where you're now expected to be an adult and be professional all the time, was there a moment of nervousness or aspect of, did I make the right decision to come to the spot and I'm worrying about being on top of my game?
Well, that's a good question as well. But I think one of the things that I try to do from the very beginning, even when I was doing high school ball, was be professional. Always be prepared the best I could, know the other team the best I could. Now, as you know, you've probably covered some high schools. It's not always easy to get the information that you need to really,
Yeah,
really do a solid job, because it's much easier when you're at the collegiate level and there's a sports information director or a public relations director in the NBA or Major League Baseball, or whatever the case may be. So when you're doing high school, you got to work a little bit harder to kind of get the information
sure.
to make sure that you have the proper information going on. But I tried to be a pro from the very beginning. So I never really had that adjustment. Oh, now I got to really be a pro because I'm doing the Texas Longhorns and there's
Yeah,
65 stations on this network. When I was doing KSAM in Huntsville was the only station carrying the Sam Houston State game. So it was quite a bit different. But at the same time, I felt like the responsibility of the listener did not change, because I had to be prepared as well as I could for that game. Because even though Sam Houston State might not be a household word around the country, somebody in Huntsville was listening to that ball game, and I
sure.
wanted to make sure that they knew I was into it and I was prepared and I was passionate for the broadcast and for the team, just like I would be years later at the University of Texas and, of course, with the Spurs.
Sure. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but in 1996, you were the recipient of the Best of Austin Award from the Austin Chronicle for Best Talk Radio Show for your show Sports Day, co-hosted with Jeff Ward. Compared to now, at that stage in your career, how important or impactful was it for you that you're now recognized for the high quality of work that you doing?
I think it's always good to get a pat on the back, especially when it comes from your peers. But that's not why we do this, right? I mean, we do this because this is what we love doing. This is
Sure.
what I always wanted to do. So I always want to be good at it. I always want to be prepared going in. And the talk show, that was part of my responsibility. And it's funny because the guy that you mentioned, Jeff Ward, he's a former kicker at the University of Texas and a very, very good kicker at the time when he played at UT. And then, of course, later he got into the radio business. But we didn't agree on anything. It was funny. That's one of the reasons why I think the show went well, because we just disagreed all the time. And it wasn't like a forced thing. Sometimes I watch ESPN, I wonder, did they just pick out topics and I'm going to take this
Yeah.
side and you take that side? That wasn't the case with Jeff. Jeff and I actually did not agree on a lot of stuff. We got along okay, but it was just, so I think that created enough tension for the listener that they could agree with him or agree with me. And they liked a little back and forth. And we had a good playful banter, I think. So
Sure.
that's important as well, even when you do disagree with somebody. But that was back in 96. And it's funny because Jeff left shortly after that. And then I started a while doing a show with Craig Way, who became the voice of the Longhorns after I left. We're still very good friends. And to this day, I really enjoyed working with Craig. And I don't think I ever won an award for a talk show, but it was just as good a talk show as the one with me and Jeff, but it was just a little bit different.
Sure. Well, a few years after that, you joined a little-known organization called expansion team called the San Antonio Spurs, of which this past year they celebrated the 50th anniversary. You were the host of the San Antonio Spurs podcast, where you interviewed some of the known players from the organization the last half a century. It's one thing to call Longhorn sporting events, but it's another thing to jump up to the NBA and calling one of the premier organizations of all time. And at that time, they were a few years into, I believe, the Tim Duncan experience.
That's
And
correct.
Tony Parker was around that time. David Robinson had been there
Yeah.
for a few years. Joining that, now you have entered, you were a big fish in the college pond, but now you're a smaller fish into the huge pond that is, or ocean, I should say, in the NBA world. Doing that, what was your expectation starting out, and were you super ready to do that next step?
I was prepared, I think. I didn't know the NBA as well as I knew college ball because obviously I had done college ball for 18 years, 6 years at Sam Houston and 12 with the University of Texas. I had to cover the NBA some on my talk show, but it's not the same as knowing the guys, traveling with the guys, knowing the ins and outs, knowing where to eat on the road, and all those little things that come with being part of an organization and learning how to do this, flying on a charter. We flew commercial mostly at the University of Texas. Now I understand they fly charter most of the time, but it was a whole new world, and it was a challenge, certainly. But the fact that I had done so many basketball games during my life at the high school level, the junior college level, the major college level. So I wasn't nervous necessarily about the game itself. I felt like I could call the game. It was the knowledge of the league and getting to know the league. And that first year, Nolan, was difficult because I was still doing Longhorn football.
Yeah.
When I agreed to take the job with WOAI, the flagship station for the Spurs and for the Spurs Radio Network, it was determined that I would still finish the football season. So I had a few conflicts there. I missed about 4 or 5 games my first season, early in the season, when I couldn't be in 2 places at one time. So that made it a little bit more of a challenge to kind of get into the flow of things as far as the NBA. But I feel like by January, when the football season was over and I really started getting into the flow of what I was doing, I could pick it up and get the momentum. And fortunately, I've been there ever since.
I mentioned some of the players that they had early on in your time with the Spurs. At what point, covering the games as the radio voice for the team, did you realize that this organization had something special?
Oh, I knew it right away. I mean, when I took the job, I knew how good Tim Duncan was, and I knew that they were going to build around him. David Robinson was kind of the tail end of his career. I caught the last 2 years of David's career, and his final year, they won the championship in 2003. Tony Parker had just been drafted. We didn't know how good he was going to be, a young kid from France, late in the first round. They had already drafted Manu Ginobili, but they had not yet brought him over. He was in Italy. So we really didn't know about Tony and Manu. They were foreign guys, and back then, international players weren't nearly as important as they are in the league as they are right now.
Sure.
So we really didn't know, but we knew going in when I took that job that they're going to be good because they've got a really good coach in Popovich, and they've got a really good player in Tim Duncan. I'm sure they're going to build around him. So that's exactly the way it worked. Tony, of course, was a rookie that year and got the starting job at the age of 19.
Now, you've covered all their championships since you've got there. Which one was your favorite to call, and why was it the most recent one in 2014?
Yeah, the 2014 one was the redemption season because of what happened in 2013. As you recall, the Miami Heat defeated the Spurs in 7 games. In Game 6, the Spurs had a golden opportunity to win the title. They would have clinched it with a win. They had a 5-point lead with 28 seconds to go in Miami. They were already quartering off the court. They had the champagne was ready. I mean, everything was set and ready to go. People were leaving the arena. And of course, I think they figured out 27 different things had to happen. And they all happened for the Miami Heat to win that game. And that's exactly what happened. So, and then of course, in Game 7, it was real close. And Tim missed the tip in that would have tied the game with about 40 seconds to go. So it just wasn't meant to be. So it was a very, very difficult loss in 13 for that entire team to come back intact. And beat the same team in the finals and drub them. It was 4-1, and it wasn't even that close, believe me. It was a thorough domination in the finals in 2014 by the Spurs. And that's why I think it was the favorite title for a lot of us that were involved with the team during that period of time because of what happened in 13. It was a great redemption season.
Well, I want to talk about, you just mentioned that practically the whole team was intact for 2014 for the redemption win. In any other situation, LeBron James for now the Lakers, although Anthony Davis is there when he was with the Cavs, or then Kobe Bryant with the Lakers, or then with Michael Jordan with the Bulls as sort of the figurehead of the program. Why do you think it's so different with the Spurs, where they have Tony Parker, one of the greatest forwards of all time? Tim Duncan. When I said Tony, Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, all 3 great players, but never a moment where they're selfish. Greg Popovich, one of the greatest coaches of all time, was able to bring all these guys back year after year. Why do you think they're so successful with that ability to bring back these teams year after year and play so selfless basketball?
Well, you just mentioned selfless, right? And I think that's a big part of it. I think each of those guys at some point took less money in their contracts than they could have if they really kind of held the team to the fire. But if they did that, then they probably wouldn't have been able to sign a Danny Green or a Tiago Splitter or some of these other very important players in the championship season. So I think that because they were unselfish, Manu Ginobili, for instance, one of the great players of all time, a Hall of Famer, agreed that it would be okay for him to come off the bench. A lot of guys wouldn't agree to do that. But Manu decided, okay, they need my spark off the bench. That's what I'll do. And that's exactly what he did all those seasons. Of course, early in the year, early in his career, he started some, but he mostly came off the bench from about the 07 season on. And that was his role with the team. So I know some guys would have had the egos that they wanted more money or they didn't want to necessarily play with this guy or that guy. The culture for the Spurs is different. They're very, very close together. And I think the fact that, Popovich was the guy all through those years, R.C. Buford was the general manager all through those years. So there was a lot of stability in the front office. There was a lot of stability in the coaching office. And therefore, of course, those three guys stayed together, the winningest trio of all time. And people don't realize the winning percentage. Manu Ginobili's winning percentage is 721. And for players that played at least 1,000 games in the NBA, it is the highest winning percentage of any player that has played. And of course, I think Tony is like 2 or 3 and Tim is in the top 5. So those three guys are 3 of the biggest winners in all time in NBA history.
This past recently, a week or two ago, they had the NBA lottery draft. And the San Antonio Spurs got the number 1 pick, which possibly will be going to Victor Wembanyama of France, which he's been called a generational talent as such, like LeBron James, which great for him, I guess. Your perspective, but also prediction in terms of who they would draft first overall and how Victor would look on that team.
Well, I think most people automatically assume it's going to be Victor Wembanyama. I haven't talked to the front office. I'm not sure what they're thinking, but I think most people pretty much feel like he's the guy. There's a lot of reasons for that. One is that he already has a connection to the organization. There's a great picture of him when he was about a 10-year-old kid wearing a Tony Parker San Antonio Spurs jersey, because Tony, of course, is the most famous player to ever come out of France to play in the NBA. And I think because of that, Victor already had kind of a connection, and he had already played in Lyon. So he knows Tony very well. Tony's very proud of Victor, obviously, with what he's been able to do. So when the ping pong balls fell just right and the Spurs got number 1, there was a huge celebration in San Antonio because they haven't made the playoffs the last 4 years. And it's been very, very different because they made the playoffs for 22 straight years, which is an NBA record. The Syracuse Nationals, Philadelphia 76ers, Syracuse was the Sixers before they moved to Philadelphia. They had made the playoffs 22 straight years. So that the Spurs tied that. So it's a period of success that is really kind of unprecedented in NBA history because in 18 of those 22 seasons, they won 50 games in a row, or 50 games, 18 seasons in a row. And that had never been done before. The Magic Johnson era Lakers had won 50, 12 years in a row. So they shattered that mark. So the consistency that the Spurs fans are used to, wasn't there the last couple of years. They've been rebuilding. Last year was a big rebuilding season. But it looks like they played their cards right because now they've obviously got the number 1 pick, and they've also got a slew of draft picks coming up over the next several draft picks, both draft lotteries or draft rounds. They've got the first and second round picks coming up, a multiple number of picks over the next 5 or 6 years.
And that's the thing that the Spurs have also done successful at is, sure, they've had their fair share of top picks, but they've also been able to successfully go through the later first round, second round, late into the second round, and even undrafted players, and done a lot with them. Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, 2 guys who weren't lottery picks. They have a few young pieces that are be good. Tyus Jones, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Jeremy Sohan, and now Wembanyama. How soon with this looking potential lineup do you see this team returning back to the playoffs?
Well, I don't know if I can fully answer that because I don't know what the team is going to look like next year. Of course, the draft is still coming up. There could be some trades made. I mentioned the fact that the Spurs have a lot of flexibility. They've got a lot of salary cap space, so they can afford to sign a couple of veterans, free agent, maybe make a deal, a 3-way trade. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on right now. I think a lot of moving parts, Nolan, before the draft and right after the draft. So we won't know quite what to expect for next season until we see this roster, and we might not know what that full roster is until right before training camp.
Now, when your schedule with the Spurs ends, more recently within April, but then when they've been super successful in June, you take a pause on that and you like to travel, national parks, music, recording music. Of course, you wrote a book within the last year or two. For you, how important is that for you to, once you're done with sports, to sort of shut that down and just completely do a 180 and focus on other things?
I would say it's very important, except for the last 2 years, I've been doing a lot of college baseball.
Yeah.
So not as many games this year as last year. I mentioned the fact that my son does UTSA, University of Texas, San Antonio. He produces some of their games. So I've actually worked for my son, which is kind of crazy when I think about it. But I like to get away and do some different things. I think that if you're all wrapped up into one thing, no matter what it is, I think it's good to have other interests. I always encourage young people to develop a different interest and to try to, whether it's like my wife and I fell in love with national parks. We both grew up in the inner city in Philadelphia. So we didn't have an opportunity, obviously, when we were young and didn't have a lot of money to travel. And then, now I've got this time because when I took the Spurs job in 2001, they told me I got the summers off. So immediately I said, okay, that means I'm going to start traveling. I wasn't quite sure where, but we started hitting the national parks. We have a friend that lives up in Montana, and we just fell in love with the outdoors and going out west and visiting these different parks. So now we've been to, I believe, 29 national parks. We've hiked in 29 different parks, and we got 3 more this summer up in Kentucky, West Virginia, that area. We're going to hit a couple of parks up there. Also, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park in Tennessee. So we're looking forward to doing that. And travel is one of the things that I would like to do during my downtime. Yeah.
I want to end on this last question before these 2 little games I have. What's next for Bill Schoening in his life, but also in sports?
Oh, wow. As far as I know, I'm still the voice of the Spurs and hope to be for a while. So we'll see what happens beyond that. But, right now, my plan is to, stay in the NBA. I'm very blessed with good health. My wife gets me up early every morning. We walk about 3 miles on our hiking trail real close to our house here. So I'm very fortunate about that. I live in a great area, Austin. So I'm in a good spot right now. I'll continue to follow up on doing my little hobby stuff. I go in the studio on Wednesday to finish up 2 songs that I've been recording with Nick Whitworth, my producer and keyboard player, who's a great guy. So I've got all these other interests. We mentioned the fact that we're going to be traveling quite a bit this summer. I got some family I want to go up and see in Philadelphia. So I try to keep my hand in a lot of different things. I love film, so I'll probably go catch some movies this year. I'm a big World War II buff, so I like to see all the movies about World War II. And I know you've read the book, but that one line about the World War II interest, my son Carl, every time he sees me watching a World War II movie, he's, Dad, I'm going to save you a little time. The Nazis lost.
Last thing I want to do with you before I let you go again, I want to thank you so much, Bill, for doing this. It's called the 1 Word Challenge. So what it tells with this is that I'll throw out a few names of people, places, or things that have some connection to my guest this week. And he has to do his best to say a word or 2 or a sentence, whatever he cares, because he's Bill. And whatever comes to mind when he thinks of it. So are you ready?
You just need a word or a sentence?
A word or 2 or a sentence, whatever comes to mind when you hear
it. Okay.
First one, Philadelphia.
Home.
San Antonio.
Tradition.
Sports broadcasting.
Life.
Basketball.
Passion.
Hard work.
Important.
Success.
Earned.
Greg Popovich.
Icon.
And last but certainly never least in this cosmic universe we all call Earth that we currently live in, Bill Schoening.
Believer.
Well, you have to be a big believer in life to succeed as much as you have. Well, good Sir Bill, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time.
Did you call me just Sir Bill? Did
you
just say Sir Bill? Did you not knight me? Am I going to get knighted by the Queen or something, or the King?
Bill. Yeah, well, now it's the king, the king of the world.
The
well,
king, not the Queen anymore, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate. Is there anything that you want people to look out for or to tune into that is of yours, whether it be Spurs or outside stuff related?
Well, if you want to read a book, thank you for letting me publicize it a little bit. It's called Story, Sports, and Songs. It's on Amazon. You can order it online. It's a fun read. It's basically about my career. But, what I try to do is not write one long story. I wrote 101 short stories. And so they're all different stories about things that happened in my life. There's Larry Bird stories, and there's all kinds of cool stories. Not everybody's a celebrity in the book, believe me. But we just had some fun because I've had some, really cool experiences in my life. So I wanted to share those. And when COVID happened, I had no games to call. I had some time on my hands. So I decided to sit down. I never thought I'd write a 300-page book, but it just kept going. So I kept going.
Yeah. Well, for all those out there who just because who the heck wouldn't, and down the line when my guest Bill gets inducted into the not just the Broadcasters Hall of Fame, but for the Texas Sports Hall of Fame, you're gonna say, "Oh my gosh, you should subscribe." So subscribe, comment, share, follow, all that fun jazz. Follow on Twitter, Nolan Court Night Show, Instagram, Nolan Court Night Show, and Twitter, Nolan Court Night. In the words of Johnny Carson, the Dean of Talk Shows, certainly like this one, I bid you all a heartfelt good night. Till next time.